Imagine the most magnificent private house in Montreal, the home of a man King Edward VII fondly called Uncle Donald, a fortress of grey stone filled with towering palms and gold-framed masterpieces, standing on the most fashionable street in the city. This is the story of Donald Smith and the Lord Strathcona residence. Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit the subscribe button and let's explore this house. Donald Smith began life about as far from a Montreal mansion as a boy could possibly get. In 1820, he was born to a modest family in a small town on the windswept northeast coast of Scotland. He picked up his schooling locally and as a young man found himself apprenticed to the town clerk of Fours, copying out documents and learning the dry routines of a small town office. What he also had, however, was an uncle with a thrilling reputation. John Stewart had gone off to the New World as a fur trader and explorer with a Hudson's Bay company, and the stories of that wild life lodged themselves firmly in the imagination of the restless clerk. In the spring of 1838, at the age of 17, Smith made his decision. He sailed for Lower Canada to seek his fortune in the fur trade, but ended up working odd jobs for the company for nearly 20 years. Labrador is where the legend was forged. Smith spent roughly 2 decades buried in one of the company's most isolated districts without the conveniences of nearly anything. He took matters into his own hands, developed a salmon cannery, exported seal oil and cranberries, brought in livestock, and coached vegetables out of the stubborn ground. But quietly, year after year, he was doing something far more consequential than canning fish. He was taking his own savings, along with the savings that his fellow officers trusted him to look after, and investing them in the shares of the Bank of Montreal. In the silence of those Labrador winters, a fortune was being assembled, one share at a time. He also built a life there. In 1853, he married Isabella Sophia Hardesty, the daughter of a fellow Hudson's Bay man, and that same year he was promoted to chief trader. By 1862, he had risen to chief factor in charge of the whole Labrador district. His growing seniority began to bring him to Montreal far more often. By 1868, Smith was running the company's Montreal department, and the following year he stepped, almost by accident, onto the national stage. Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald appointed him a federal commissioner. From there, his rise became almost vertical. He climbed through the senior ranks of the Hudson's Bay Company, serving as its chief commissioner and later as a land commissioner. And finally, in 1889, being elected its governor. He kept that post until the end of his life, by which point he was the largest shareholder in the entire enterprise. His great triumphs, though, came on the railways, and they made him fabulously rich. In 1878, he joined his cousin George Stephen and a small circle of bold investors, among them the steamboat man named Norman Kittson and the future railway giant James J. Hill, to buy up a bankrupt American railroad called the St. Paul and Pacific. Reorganized in 1879 as the St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Manitoba Railway, the venture proved staggeringly profitable. Its net worth shot from a few $100,000 to roughly $25 million in the span of about 5 years, and it laid the foundation for what would later become the Great Northern. That same tight-knit group of men formed the heart of the syndicate that took on the colossal task of building the Canadian Pacific Railway beginning in 1880. In 1885, in British Columbia, it was Donald Smith who was given the honor of driving the last spike that finally joined the Canadian Pacific Railway from sea to sea. He was knighted in 1886 and again in 1897. As part of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, he was raised to the peerage as Baron Strathcona in Mount Royal. And now we come to his house, because a man of this stature did not live quietly. Lord Strathcona's Montreal home stood on the north side of Dorchester Street, the broad thoroughfare known today as Boulevard René Lévesque, in the very heart of the district that Montrealers called the Golden Square Mile. That name was no exaggeration. This was a roughly square mile of land on the southern slope of Mount Royal, and for the better part of a century, from about 1840 until the great houses finally fell, it was home to an overwhelmingly Scottish and English mercantile elite who together controlled an enormous share of the country's entire wealth. In 1911, he engaged the celebrated Montreal architects Edward and William Sutherland Maxwell, the brothers behind the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, to design a series of additions and alterations. The overall result was a late Victorian composition faced in the rough grey limestone that gave Montreal its enduring nickname of the Grey City, and it blended Scottish and French 19th century elements into what many considered at the time the most handsome house in Montreal. It rose 3 full stories into the air, presenting a rugged textured stone face to the street, punctuated by dramatic dormer windows and dominated by a prominent corner tower whose roofline and French detailing played against the heavy masonry below. The journalists of the day, writing in the illustrated papers, reached for the obvious word and called it a palatial residence. As we enter the house, we'll see the photos in increasing quality, starting with the rooms that have almost been completely lost to time and decay. The grand salon was gilded from top to bottom and stuffed full of fine furnishings and antiques. You entered the dining room through a giant archway to find walls paneled in mahogany at half height, with rows of neatly displayed porcelains circling the room above. Next, we'll make our way over to the conservatory, where a roaring fountain stands proudly above a tile mosaic floor, with palms fanning in the background. The conservatory would be kept hot and humid year-round, allowing the family a tropical escape throughout the harsh winter months. But above all, there was the picture gallery, and it was here that Strathcona kept a collection that made his house famous. He was a serious and devoted collector, and his taste ran heavily toward the academic painting of his era, the kind of polished, accomplished canvases that had hung in the great exhibitions of the Paris Salon and the Royal Academy in London. He also championed Canadian artists owning works by painters such as John Arthur Fraser and Homer Watson, and he amassed an enormous trove of decorative objects and antiques, including a large body of treasures from Asia. To modernize, the gallery would look almost cluttered, the paintings stacked closely together from the height of a chair rail all the way up to the cornice, with scarcely a breath of bare wall left between the heavy frames. But that crowding was entirely deliberate, because that was precisely how wealthy collectors of the period chose to display their pictures. In that world, more was simply more. Naturally, Strathcona used his house exactly as a man of his station was expected to, which is to say lavishly. He entertained royalty and the highest officials of the age beneath its roof. In 1901, he received the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall and York, the couple who would soon ascend the throne as King George V and Queen Mary. But the end, when it came swiftly for the man himself. Isabella, his wife of 60 years, died in November of 1913. Lord Strathcona followed her just over 2 months later, passing well in London in January of 1914 at the remarkable age of 93. The fate of the house followed the fate of the Golden Square Mile itself, and that fate, in the end, was decline. Income taxes arrived, the crash of 1929 came and went, the small armies of servants that such houses demanded grew impossibly expensive to maintain, and the commercial city marched relentlessly uphill into what had once been a residential paradise. And in 1941, the great mansion was pulled down to make way for an apartment building. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. What did you think about the Strathcona residence? Let me know down below in the comments section, and while you're there, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of This House.